Annual crops demand constant effort. Every spring you start again. You till, you plant, you weed, you water, you protect. Every fall you harvest, and then the entire system collapses back to zero. What you're really doing is exchanging labor for food on a repeating 12-month loop that never improves. No matter how skilled you become, the reset still comes. Trees operate on a completely different logic. You plant them once, you wait, and then, year after year, they produce food with little or no input. Not for one season, but for decades. Sometimes for centuries. A tree doesn't just feed you, it feeds everyone who comes after you. There are 8 trees that, over their lifetime, will produce more food than you could ever grow from annual gardens using the same amount of space. One of them produces hundreds of pounds of chocolate-flavored pods every year, stores without processing, and survives droughts that wipe out entire farms. Another can feed a family of 4 almost entirely from a single tree, and once supported whole civilizations on its own. These aren't decorative trees, they're not landscaping. They are long-term food production systems. Assets that compound instead of depreciate. Systems your great-grandchildren can still harvest from long after you're gone. The truth is uncomfortable but simple. The best time to plant these trees was decades ago. The second best time is right now. Let's start with one almost nobody talks about anymore. Mulberry trees are one of the most overlooked food producers in the world. Grocery stores don't sell them. Not because they lack value, but because they're too good at being fresh. The fruit bruises easily, it doesn't ship well. So, most people never taste it and never realize what they're missing. A mature mulberry tree can produce 50 to 80 pounds of fruit every single year. And it doesn't dump it all at once. The fruit ripens gradually over several weeks, which means steady harvesting instead of overwhelm. You don't need equipment. You don't need processing. You pick it and eat it. What makes mulberries truly valuable isn't just the yield. It's the effort required, or more accurately, the lack of it. Mulberries don't need pruning, they don't need pest management, they don't need fertilizer. They tolerate poor soil, drought, and neglect better than almost any fruit tree. You plant them, water them while they establish, and then you largely leave them alone. They grow fast. A mulberry planted as a young tree will often start producing within 3 to 5 years, which is incredibly fast compared to most fruit trees. Apples can take twice that long before they produce meaningfully. Mulberries don't make you wait. Historically, they were serious food. Across Asia and parts of Europe, mulberries were a staple crop. In regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan, dried mulberries are still stored for winter consumption today. When dried, the fruit reaches roughly 10% protein, which is unusually high for fruit and extremely valuable in times of scarcity. Mulberries are flexible. You can eat them fresh. You can dry them, you can make jam, ferment them, freeze them, or store them long term. Even the leaves are edible and nutritious. They're what silkworms feed on, which tells you something about their nutritional density. Plant them where falling fruit won't be a problem because they will drop berries for weeks. Choose white, red, or black mulberry varieties depending on your climate. Water during the first year or 2. After that, the tree largely takes care of itself. And then, every summer for the next 50 years or more, food appears. Another tree capable of quietly outperforming entire gardens is the chestnut. Not the small decorative kind, but true edible chestnuts. For centuries, chestnuts were a primary carbohydrate for large populations across Europe and Asia. In some regions, people survived winters almost entirely on chestnuts and water. A single mature chestnut tree can produce 100 to 200 pounds of nuts every year. And these aren't empty calories. Chestnuts are rich in complex carbohydrates, fiber, minerals, and enough protein to matter. Unlike most nuts, they're low in fat and easy to digest. You can eat them roasted, boiled, ground into flour, or dried for long-term storage. What makes chestnuts exceptional is their efficiency. Once established, they don't need irrigation in most climates. They're deep-rooted, meaning drought barely affects them. They shade the soil beneath them, improving moisture retention and preventing erosion. And they don't exhaust the land the way annual grains do. There's a reason chestnut forests were once called bread trees. One tree could replace entire fields of wheat, and it would do it for generations. Modern agriculture moved away from chestnuts, not because they were ineffective, but because they didn't fit industrial systems. They don't harvest well with machines. They don't fit monoculture schedules. But for individuals and families thinking long-term, they are unmatched. Then there's the fig tree. Figs don't just grow food. They rewrite the rules of where food can grow. Figs thrive in rocky soil, shallow soil, poor soil, and places where most crops fail completely. Ancient ruins across the Mediterranean are still surrounded by fig trees planted thousands of years ago, still producing fruit. A mature fig tree can yield 50 to 100 pounds of fruit per year, often in multiple harvests. The fruit is calorie-dense, mineral-rich, and easy to preserve. Dried figs can last months without refrigeration and were historically used as travel food because of their energy density. Figs don't demand precision, they tolerate heat. They tolerate drought, they tolerate neglect. In many climates, you can literally stick a fig cutting into the ground and it will root on its own. Few food plants are that forgiving. And then there's the olive tree. Olive trees don't rush, they don't impress quickly, but once they begin producing, they don't stop. Many olive trees still producing today were planted before modern nations existed. Olives give you fat, which is one of the hardest nutrients to produce locally. Olive oil stores well, preserves food, and provides calories that fruits and vegetables cannot. A single mature olive tree can yield 30 to 50 pounds of olives annually, translating into several liters of oil each year. Like chestnuts and figs, olives are drought tolerant and thrive in poor soil. They prefer neglect over attention. Overwatering and fertilizing often harms them more than helps. These trees don't ask for yearly devotion. They ask for patience once and then they repay it repeatedly. They don't just feed you. They stabilize land, improve soil, and create resilience that annual crops never can. One tree that most people underestimate is the moringa tree. Often called the miracle tree, moringa doesn't focus on calories alone. It delivers nutrition density that very few plants on Earth can match. Its leaves contain high levels of protein, iron, calcium, potassium, and essential vitamins. Gram for gram, moringa leaves outperform many of the vegetables people depend on every day. What makes moringa especially powerful is speed. Unlike most trees, moringa grows fast. In warm climates, it can be harvested within months rather than years. You don't wait a decade to see results. You prune it and it grows back stronger. You cut it and it regenerates again. This turns it into a continuous food system instead of a seasonal one. Nearly every part of the tree is usable. The leaves can be eaten fresh or dried into powder for storage. The seed pods are consumed like vegetables. The seeds themselves can be eaten or pressed for oil. Even the roots and bark have traditional uses. Very few plants offer that level of output with such low maintenance. There's a deeper truth that connects this tree with all the others. Together, they represent a different way of thinking about survival. Modern food systems rely on constant input. Fertilizers.fuel, replanting.transport. Fragile supply chains that only work when everything else works. Trees operate on the opposite logic. They store effort. You invest once and the return repeats. A food tree doesn't respond to fuel prices. It doesn't stop producing because imports slow down. It doesn't reset every year. Once established, it keeps going. This is why ancient societies planted trees first and crops second. Trees created stability, crops were the bonus. This isn't about rejecting modern life or living off-grid. It's about leverage. One well-chosen tree can outperform years of repeated labor. A handful of trees can quietly provide more real security than shelves of packaged food. The most valuable systems aren't fast. They're patient. They don't chase trends or urgency. They grow slowly, quietly, and reliably. That's why the smartest food producers don't ask what grows fastest this year. They ask what will still be feeding people long after they're gone. Walnut trees are often planted for shade or timber, but their real value is long-term food security. A mature walnut tree can produce 50 to 80 pounds of nuts every year. That translates to well over 100,000 calories from a single tree annually. Walnuts are dense in fats, protein, and essential omega-3 fatty acids, nutrients that are difficult to replace when food systems break down. Unlike many foods, walnuts store extremely well. Kept in their shells, they can last more than a year without refrigeration. Once established, walnut trees require almost no maintenance. They tolerate cold, drought, and poor soil. You protect them while young, then step back and let them produce for decades. Some walnut trees continue producing for over 100 years, feeding people who never planted them. Walnut trees also offer a second layer of value. The wood itself is highly prized. Historically, these trees were planted along property lines and roads because they eventually became valuable timber. The food was the ongoing return. The wood was the long-term asset. During economic hardship, families with walnut trees had both nutrition and something valuable to trade or sell. That dual purpose is rare. You're not just planting food. You're planting security that grows in value over time. Apple trees are the backbone of food security in colder climates. They're so common that people underestimate how powerful they really are. A mature apple tree can produce 200 to 400 pounds of fruit each year. That's an enormous amount of food from a single planting. The real strength of apples is versatility. Fresh apples can be stored for months in cool conditions. Dried apples last more than a year. Apple cider can be fermented and stored indefinitely. Before modern refrigeration, apples were one of the few reliable winter fruits available. Historically, apple orchards were essential. In temperate regions, every homestead planted apples because they were dependable, productive, and storable. When grain crops failed, apples provided carbohydrates and vitamin C, preventing malnutrition and disease. Apple trees tolerate cold far better than many fruit trees, making them viable where figs, citrus, and peaches can't survive. The trade-off is time. Apples take patience. Most trees need 6 to 10 years to reach full production and require cross-pollination from another variety. They also attract pests, which means some management is required. But once established, apple trees can produce reliably for 50 to 80 years. Together, walnuts and apples cover two critical needs. Walnuts provide dense calories and fats that sustain the body. Apples provide volume, storage, and nutritional balance. Planted once, they quietly produce food year after year, long after the effort of planting is forgotten. Next, we have the cocoa tree, also called the carob tree, the chocolate that survives drought. Unlike most fruit trees, carob thrives in harsh, dry conditions where other crops fail. A mature carob tree produces 200 to 400 pounds of sweet pods each year. The pods taste naturally like chocolate, can be eaten raw, ground into powder as a cocoa substitute, or processed into syrup. Even better, the pods store for years without refrigeration. Just harvest dry and keep them in a cool, dry place. Carob trees are slow to start, taking 6 to 8 years before producing, but once established, they yield for 80 to 100 years with virtually no maintenance. No pruning, no fertilization, no pest control, just plant and let them grow. They're perfect for long-term food security in warming, drying climates. Plant them in full sun with excellent drainage, water only during the first few years, and in a decade you'll be harvesting hundreds of pounds of chocolate-flavored pods year after year. These trees aren't just food, they're legacy. They outlive us, feed generations, and provide stability that no annual crop can match. When you combine walnut, apple, and carob trees in your food system, you create layered security, calories, nutrition, and storage that last decades. The best time to plant was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Don't wait. Start building your orchard, your future food security, and the legacy that will feed generations. If this changed how you think about long-term food and security, subscribe for more strategies that focus on systems that last, not just solutions that expire.